Hi there, Scott here from the Warren Youth Project and the Amped Creative Opportunities team, here to share 5 tips, things I do all the time. Some are functional, some are creative, and probably can be applied to any DAW or workstation that you're using. So here we go, let's run the titles. Right, tip number 1, when you load up a default set from Ableton, as in probably most other DAWs, the volumes are all set to 0 dB, which is fine, absolutely fine. But what I tend to find is that as I start loading sounds up, instruments, samples, that all together the noise starts to peak above the master, and you don't want that. You need to keep that within acceptable boundaries. You can peak and go in the red on the individual tracks without any real degradation of sound, thanks to some of Ableton's algorithms and what have you. But what I'd like to always do is start every set with all my volumes set to -10, just so as I start dropping things in, it's going to be a long while before I start getting in the red. Obviously, these can be adjusted after if you've got a very quiet sample or sound in there and you need to up it a bit, but you can do that again with different plugins on the effects chain as well. Tip number 2, I tend to group my drums together. So depending on what sort of drums I'm using, whether they're MIDI drums or drum racks that are part of Ableton, or whether I'm dropping in samples, I group them together so I can still treat each of them individually and adjust their volumes, EQ, and put effects on them, but then I generally run them all through a group together, so I can minimize them and maximize them all in one go, so I can free up some space on the screen, but also so then I can add some of their own effects to sort of gel them or glue them together. Ableton has some lovely little things like the drum bus and the glue compressor, and obviously EQing and any effects you might want to add on there. You can add them to all the drums, so it's sort of a functional and creative as well, that one. Which leads me on to tip number 3. I tend to, and others will have different ways of doing things, I tend to always use this plugin I've got called the sausage fattener. I use that on my drums all the time. It gives them a bit of crunch, a bit of bite. For example, I'll just solo the drums here. I'll turn off the sausage fattener. Sausage fattener on. Does exactly what it says in the tin. It is essentially a saturator, so there is one of those in Ableton, and combine that with a few other effects, like I say, the drum bus and things like that. And you'll get a very similar sound from the built-in stuff from Ableton. I just like the sausage fattener. And whilst we're here, tip number 3, you might notice on this drum track here, the MIDI drums, I've labelled and coloured the different sections just so it's easier for me when I'm copying and pasting and moving things around. So as you can see, this drum here is just a kick. That's just a kick. I want a little side stick sound there. And then we've got the full drum loop. So that's real handy for my own. It's more of a useful tip than a creative tip there. It just helps me remember what I'm copying and pasting. If they all look the same and they're all the same colour and they all have the same name, it's very hard to pick out the bit you want. Next tip, generally, and again, there isn't a hard and fast rule, you sort of do it to suit your ear and your tastes. I low cut anything that's not bass. This area of your EQ, of your overall sound, it's for your low frequencies, so things like sub bass, low bass sounds, kick drums, they should be taking up this portion. And to stop it from getting muddied, I generally, and you can see on this synth track here, I've cut it again on the vocals, cut that low end. So yeah, cutting things out gives more room for other frequencies. Next tip, generally on my master bus, which is where all your sounds are going, I have a utility on there and it has the option of listening to it in mono. And obviously you might be thinking most music's in stereo, and that's true. Not everything that plays back the music is in stereo. For example, club systems, because of the way their speakers are placed and spread around the venue, put out in mono. Again, some Bluetooth speakers put out in mono. My little Bluetooth radio in my kitchen puts out in mono. So sometimes when I'm working on a track and I've done some really nice stereo spreading, I go and listen to it down in my kitchen just so I know whether those sounds are getting completely lost. Because when you cut to just a mono sound, you will find that sometimes, and I've heard this on my own tracks, that things that I've thought sounded great and wide just disappear in the mix. They're not there at all. They've almost completely gone sometimes in the mix because I wasn't considering how it would sound in mono. So generally when I'm starting on a track, I tend to have this activated for most of it, and I take it off every now and again. And then when I've got the sort of all the levels right, that's when I would release the mono setting and start moving things, panning things, adding a bit of reverb and delays, and using certain effects to get a bit more spread of the sound, knowing that when it's going to get played back in mono, the sounds are all still there. So that was 5 short, sweet little tips, things I do all the time, or most of the time. You might find them useful, you might find a better way of doing them, or you might already do them yourself. There will be more of these little tips coming, so tune in next time. Stay beautiful and take care. Bye now.